interesting commander deck type that I haven't tried yet, and luckily y'all suggested it in the comment section. So for Nadirku and also Leveler X9, I hope I can make you proud by making a Grenzo deck. Now, what is Grenzo? What is it? What is this guy? What is he doing? Why do we care about him? Well, there's two Grenzos, and the main one we're going to be using is Grenzo the Dungeon Warden. He enters the battlefield with X11 counters, which you can see denoted by his mana cost, and he allows you, for 2 mana, to put the bottom card of your library into the graveyard. And if it happens to be a creature with power less than or equal to his power, then we get to vomit it on the battlefield. Oh, the ways we will abuse this man. So, there's a couple of angles that we can take with this kind of commander, and one of the main ones is shitting out a bunch of little guys, but that's kind of boring. Getting a ton of little guys on the board is We're not an aristocrats deck here. We're not trying to get a bunch of little guys out and then get massive advantage from them. I want big guys out. I want giant monsters that our opponents have to contend with. So we're going to get Grenzo Giant as well. That said, let's go ahead and get into the core strategy of this deck. As usual, the budget for our deck is around $15, not counting a commander who's allowed to be $1 or less. Grenzo Dungeon Warden provides an interesting opportunity for us. One, to not just play with the top of our deck, but to also spend a lot of time manipulating the bottom of our deck. The goal for this deck is going to be to play an entirely creature-based strategy. This means our ramp needs to exist within creatures, and our creatures also need to be responsible for the breadth of our removal and everything else. For this challenge, I am choosing not to run anything that is a non-creature, not counting lands. Lands are the only thing that we are allowed to muck up with. To aid us in this goal, we will be using a variety of methods to both get Grenzo's power up and also get our own entourage of creatures ready to annihilate our opponents. Let's begin with Drillworks Mole in our Counters Matter package, which will give a 1/1 counter to itself and our commander. This means every turn, Grenzo will be able to put progressively bigger things onto the battlefield from the bottom of our library. We also have Una's Blackguard, which says that every other rogue, which our commander happens to be one, touches the battlefield. We go ahead and put a 1/1 counter on it, and it also has an upside where if rogues beat people in the face with 1/1 counters, then they discard a card. Well, anything beats people in the face with 1/1 counters, but you know what I mean. Then we've got Fane the Broker, who, hasn't really been loved ever, but has been put into so many commander precons that he's 17 cents. I do not know which executive at Wizards of the Coast keeps forcing him into our precons, but at least we have him for this. He allows us to tap and sacrifice any of our creatures to put 2 1/1 counters on a target creature. We're going to use this to use up creatures who have already served their purpose and do not have any other variable upside to go ahead and power up our commander. He's got a bunch of other abilities on him as well, like being able to sack artifacts to make inklings and remove counters from creatures to make treasures. It's stuff that if you find use for in the middle of a game, then you're going to use it. Otherwise, you're not going to be doing a whole lot with it. To back up our Counters Matter section, we also have a backup section consisting of 5 cards. There's more backup in the deck than these, but these are the ones whose only real purpose is to provide backup. Deathgreeter's Champion has dash, so we can use it repeatedly every turn, adding a 1/1 counter to our commander and giving him double strike for a funny haha Voltron wincon when we're in the scenario to make that happen. We also have the Mirror Style Master, which will add a counter to our commander due to its backup ability, and whenever a creature attacks, for every attacking modified creature we control, we create a tapped and attacking copy of that creature and exile the tokens at the end of combat. While this will not help us a lot with our commander's ability, it will help us when we distribute counters onto other creatures, and we want to double up on their ETB effects, for instance. Then we have the Scornblade Berserker, which adds a 1/1 counter with backup. He also has the ability to sacrifice any creature to draw a card. Will sacrifice itself to draw a card, but of course we have backup, so we're throwing that onto any creature that we want. We're going to throw it onto our commander primarily, but let's be honest, sometimes we're just going to put it onto a little guy that we've already used and get rid of him for some draw power. Fearless Scald has a double strike and backup just like the Deathgreeter's Champion, but does not give us the benefit of having dash, so we don't really get to use this ability very often. Luckily, even though it costs 5 mana normally, our commander circumvents that because it's going to be playing this from the bottom of the deck. Consuming Aetherborn also can be played without really powering up the commander at all, has backup 1, and will grant lifelink to whoever it throws a 1/1 counter onto. And with all the 1/1 counters we're throwing around, we may as well go ahead and add in a little bit of a win con with Thundering Raiju. He's got haste, and anytime he attacks, he'll put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control. Then he'll deal X damage to every opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures we control, other than Thundering Raiju. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a Thundering Raiju win con, it's kind of insane how powerless you feel when it happens. But when it happens, the burn is very, very hard. However, we also want to not just gamble with putting cards on the bottom of our library. We want to make sure that we are putting cards on the bottom of our library that we want there. And we've got a few ways of facilitating that. Starting with these 4 power bottoms in our deck, beginning with Cogwork Archivist. It's got reach to block flyers, and for 2 mana and tapping it, we can put a card from any graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. We can use this to cuck people who are trying to reanimate cards. We can also use this to put one of our powerful cards on the bottom of our library and then get it back with our commander. Junk Troller can be brought down at any point with our commander because it's got 0 power. Put target card from a graveyard in its owner's library on the bottom, and also it's got Defender. Tomb Trawler also has the ability to put a card from our graveyard on the bottom of our library for the low cost of 2 mana, and it's an 0/4, so it comes out easy with our commander's ability. And Canal Dredger does a lot of things if you're playing in Conspiracy, and doesn't matter at all for what we are doing. All that matters is that we can tap it to put a card from our graveyard on the bottom of our library. I love that random bullcrap cards like this from Conspiracy that don't do anything in most decks do a lot in our deck specifically. But we also need to have more ways of getting our commander big besides 1/1 counters, because if our commander dies, it of course loses the 1/1 counters. But of course, counters only work so long as our commander is on the board and hasn't been killed any amount of time. If we want to make sure our commander is live at all times, we need to rely on Lords as well, beginning with the Ashenmoor Liege in our 6-card Lords package. This card has 4 power, 1 toughness, gives other black creatures 1/1, other red creatures 1/1, so our commander gets 2/2, and whenever he becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, that player will lose 4 life. This card is fantastic, and if we are able to duplicate it with one of the backup cards that I showed earlier, then we can use it for a huge Haymaker swing turn. Hellspur Posse Boss also is wonderful, gives Outlaws haste like our commander, and as it enters the battlefield, we get to create 2 red mercenary creature tokens, and those tokens can be tapped to add 1/0 to a creature. We're going to drop the mercenaries on the board, tap them, and add 2/0 to our commander so that our commander can grab progressively stronger cards out of our deck. Paragon of Fierce Defiance gives other red creatures 1/1 and also can give them haste. Paragon of Open Graves give all black creatures 1/1 and can give one of our black creatures Death Touch. Draina, Liberator of Malakir, can give 1/1 counters to our entire attacking board after hitting somebody with First Strike, supplementing our counters package. And Judith the Scourge Diva gives all of our creatures 1/0, and if any of our creatures die, we can deal 1 damage to any target. We can use this to snipe things like Birds of Paradise off the board, or just to slowly chip away more damage at our opponents. Either way, we are going to be doing a lot with her, especially with Draina. But we also need to make sure that if we throw duds into the graveyard, we can get them back, so we've got a Recursion package as well. Chainer Nightmare Adept lets us discard cards from our hand into the graveyard to cast creatures from the graveyard. This is also super useful for us since it lets us get rid of cards in our hand that we are not able to cast, and then throw them onto the bottom of our library with our bottom of library package so that we can get them with Grenzo. Young Necromancer exiles 2 cards from a graveyard in order to return any creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. Even though she costs 5, she happens to have a very low attack power. Champion of Stray Souls can pay 5 mana into itself to sack X creatures and return X creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield. We also could put him on the top of our library with his effect, which is very important because that means we can scry him to the bottom of our library and then get him with Grenzo. Then we have Terror of Tawashi, a Death Touch creature that anytime it attacks, we get to pay 3 and return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield, turning it into a Phyrexian. And then we have another backup creature in Archpriest of Shadows. This card has Death Touch, and anytime a creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, if it is the Archpriest of Shadows or whatever it backed up that turn, then we go ahead and get another creature from our graveyard to the battlefield free of charge. And finally, with all of the ways that we are shoving cards into the graveyard, let's go ahead and put the top end up as Bladewing Deathless Tyrant, a wonderful creature that summons a 2/2 black zombie knight with menace for every single card in our graveyard, or every single creature in our graveyard, and our deck is all creatures. One of the benefits of Bladewing in our deck specifically is that he has wonderful synergy with Draina, Liberator of Malakir. If Draina's on the board, she will add a 1/1 counter onto all of those menace creatures before they make impact with an opponent, and if we have one final piece of the puzzle, the Thundering Raiju, we will also be getting a ton of stuff from him. Not on the turn we initially attack, of course, but on subsequent turns. Hold on to your Thundering Raiju until you know that you have the ability to do that big haymaker after you've swung with all the zombies and they haven't quite made lethal damage to everyone yet. But with a deck like this, we do need to have ways of digging through it. Even though we are playing primarily from the bottom of our library, we still want to be able to cast spells from our hand as we need them. So let's get into the draw package of this deck and see how we are going to be doing just that. Our draw package consists of 13 cards, and they all serve various purposes in the deck, either being good draw power on their own or being small incremental draw power that come out with our commander's ability quite easily. Let's get into each of these as we go, beginning with Phyrexian Gargantua. 4 power, so it's easy to get this with our commander's ability as early as turn 4. Phyrexian Gargantua enters the battlefield, and we get to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life when it does. It's the big boy version of Phyrexian Rager, which comes onto the battlefield drawing us 1 card and making us lose 1 life, which is the same as Vault Plunderer, which does the same thing, and Merciless Harlequin, which does the same thing, and Sky Scanner, which does the same thing minus the life loss. They're all basically the same card for our purposes. They enter the battlefield, draw us a card, and then we can use them to sacrifice into any of our stuff that matters. We also have Starving Revenant, enters the battlefield, lets us surveil 2, and then we draw any amount of those cards we surveilled, losing 3 life for each, and it descends 8. If we draw a card, if there are 8 or more permanents in our graveyard, easy to accomplish with our deck, then target opponent will lose 1 life and we will gain 1 life. This will allow us to keep very healthy later in the game if we decide to use more draw cards later. It can also help circumvent stuff like Evolving Sleeper, which comes down for 1 mana, can be turned into a 2/2 human cleric by leveling it up once. If we level it up again, it turns into a 3/3 cleric, and if we level it up one more time, it gets a 1/1 counter and then lets us draw a card and lose a life. If this is on the board with the Starving Revenant, then we're never losing a life for that card draw, and we might even be able to sink mana into slowly draining somebody out of the game. We also have the other Grenzo, Havoc Razor. Whenever this deals, or any creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to exile the top card of that player's library and then cast that card and use mana of any color to cast that spell until the end of turn, giving us impulse draw for other people's libraries. Skullport Merchant enters the battlefield, giving us a treasure token for a little bit of ramp. He also lets us sacrifice creatures or treasures to draw cards. He can do some fun things with Fane the Broker, but honestly, he's just here because we're going to get some free ramp and draw out of him. Moira Scavenger can make a token whenever he discards a card that's a creature, which is our entire deck. He's also got Death Touch and Haste, so he makes a really cool blocker. Otherwise, this is a Merfolk looter for our deck. Greven, Predator Captain, has Menace, and he gains XO, where X is the amount of life we have lost this turn, giving him wonderful synergy with Evolving Sleeper. Whenever he attacks, we may sacrifice any other creature and then draw cards equal to that creature's power and lose life equal to that creature's toughness, which means he always will be able to get nice and big, and we can use him to throw away used up copies of Vault Plunderer, Phyrexian Rager, Phyrexian Gargantua, Sky Scanner. He just lets us double up on their draw and gets himself bigger, which makes him harder to block, which means we get to blow up more creatures in combat with him. Then we have Shadowheart Dark Justicar. This card lets us sacrifice another creature to draw X cards, where X is that creature's power, and Disciple of Bolas, which does the same thing, but only when it enters the battlefield, and he gains us life when he does so as well. With all of these, we should be able to power through enough of our deck on the top, while our commander is powering through everything on the bottom of our deck. It is important to note when playing a budget deck that you need to be disrupting other people's strategies more often than you otherwise would, because you will be slower than your other opponents. So to facilitate this, we've got a 16 card interaction package, beginning with Voracious Fell Beast, a 4/4 flyer who can start threatening people's life totals in his own right that makes everybody sacrifice a creature when he enters the battlefield. He also gives you food for it. Ghastly Death Tyrant can cover our color weakness, since normally we can't really get rid of enchantments very easily, but we can drop this down, blowing up an enchantment when he touches the board. Gormond is a 5/5 flying trample creature that says at an additional cost to cast this, sack a creature. We will never be casting this. It just pops on the board with our commander. When he enters the battlefield, every opponent must sacrifice a creature. And again, he's a 5/5. He can close out games on his own. Meteor Golem just happens to be perfect. No, Meteor Golem happens to be a 3/3, easy to get down with our commander, and blows up any kind of permanent. Rankle and Torbrand is a 3/4, super easy to get out with our commander, has flying, first strike, haste, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, choose any number of these abilities. Everybody sacks a creature, everybody creates a treasure, or if a source would deal damage to a player this turn, it deals that much damage +2, meaning he basically gives 2 more power to everything on our board, effectively. Only if they hit battles, though, or players. Plague Crafter makes everybody sack a creature when he touches the board, so does Locust Heavy Destroyer, while also being a flyer in his own right with Unearth. Uxida Scrap Melter lets us blow up artifacts by just dropping this creature on the board. Patron of the Vein blows up creatures and then puts a 1/1 counter on every vampire you control when he touches the board. Accursed Marauder is another Plague Crafter. Butcher of Malakir is a 5/4 flyer who can threaten people's life totals, and anytime one of our creatures die, everybody sacks a creature. This will also allow us to double up on things like the Plague Crafter and Locust Heavy Destroyer and Accursed Marauder triggers. Then we have Callous Blood Mage, enters the battlefield either exiling target player's graveyard or drawing us a card, or making a bat token that we'll never choose. Rankle lets us make everybody sacrifice a creature, or make every player lose a life and draw a card, or make every player discard a card. That first one's really useful for us because, let's be honest, we're not playing out of our hand. Maris Eliminator gives us a pseudo board wipe for a single person, or lets us blow up a single creature. Dalek Drone lets us blow up a creature while also making opponent lose 3 life while being a flying menace creature, and Ravenous Chupacabra lets us blow up a creature when he touches the board on his own. He's also a 2/2, so he's super easy to get down with our commander with no setup whatsoever. Finally, we have Malfagor to make use of all of those cards in our hand that we will never be casting. Malfagor touches the battlefield and lets us discard our hand. Every opponent sacrifices a creature for every single card we discard this way. Since we're not playing cards out of our hand that often, Malfagor will often make people sacrifice a minimum of 3 to 4 creatures, which is basically a board wipe. If I can cast 1 card and trade 4 cards for 12, then I'm already in a wonderful position. All of these should ideally help us disrupt our opponents a lot throughout the game, but we also need to make sure we have enough mana to get our commander online. So let's get into that. Like I said before, it's important that all the cards in our deck happen to be creatures other than our lands, so we even have a fully creature-based ramp package, beginning with Mere Convert. Pay 2 life, add a mana of any color, and then it's got Toxic. We're never using the Toxic, but that 2 life that we're paying into it does actually serve a purpose. In most of my decks, I put this in just because it's cheap, but if we happen to be in a situation where our Predator is on the board, then we can get more power into the Predator for the life we are losing with Mere Convert. Bronze Walrus lets us scry 2, which of course synergizes amazingly with our commander, while also adding a mana of any color when we tap it. Burnished Heart lets us search our library for 2 basic lands after sacking it and putting them on the battlefield. Hedron Crawler is just a mana dork, as is Iron Mirror, Leaden Mirror, Ornithopter of Paradise, and Mannequin. Palladian Mirror is another mana dork, but he taps for 2 mana, which is really good with our commander. And then we have Solemn Simulacrum. This enters the battlefield searching our library for any basic land, and if it dies, we get to draw a card. And because it's got a power of 2, honestly, it's going to feel really good dropping this out of the bottom of our deck, just getting that free ramp immediately. But our land base gets to be a little bit different than normal. See, typically, there's types of cards that I really dislike. I do not like lands that come into play tapped, and I do not like temples because scrying is not enough of an incentive to have a land come to play tapped unless I'm fetching it out of my deck and getting double duty off of it. However, if we look at the land base of this deck, which is 34 lands, lower than usual to increase our chances of getting cards on the board with Grenzo, we have 7 swamps and 8 mountains, but past that, our dual lands begin with a Temple of Malice. This card has amazing synergy with our deck because it lets us choose if we want to have a card on the top or throw it to the bottom, which is wonderful since our commander only plays from the bottom of the deck. Then we've got Command Tower, Foreboding Ruins, Tainted Peak, Smoldering Marsh, Rakdos Cranarium, and Shadowblood Ridge, as well as dual lands. Then we have our fetching lands as we normally do. A Promising Vein is in here, along with Ash Barrens, Evolving Wild, Myriad Landscape, Grixis Panorama, Escape Tunnel, Terramorphic Expanse, Shire Terrace, and Jund Panorama. All of these gives us access to deck shuffles, which can matter in instances where opponents have forced us to throw things to the bottom of the deck that we do not want, which can happen quite a lot depending on the game that we're in. Also, we need access to some fun utility lands. So for us, we are going to be running Crystal Grotto, the Grey Haven, and Zalfiran Void. Each of these scries when we drop them onto the board, so we get to just select cards to go onto the bottom for our commander to summon. And then we've got Pit of Offerings, which comes into the battlefield tapped and exiles 3 cards from all of our opponent's graveyards, or up to 3 cards total. So we can get rid of a problem card from everybody's graveyard, or we can get rid of something from the reanimation player's graveyard. You take your pick. I just think the Pit of Offerings is a wonderful budget Bojuka Bog that you should be running. That said, that's it for the lands. What would you do if you had a little more of a budget to drop on this deck? Well, let's find out. As always, if you are upgrading this deck, the goal is to pick whichever path works best for you and have fun. Take out cards that I've selected that you don't like and add in cards that I've selected that you do like, or really any cards that you want. It is obviously your time to shine, not mine, as you're upgrading the deck. But if you are upgrading the deck, there are a couple of angles you can go. One is converting the deck into kind of a more stormy deck, and the other one is converting the deck into more of a burn-heavy deck. And obviously, you can mix and match things as you choose. At the budget that we were working at, I chose to go with the combat route with flyers, but you can choose whichever way you want to go. But if you are upgrading in any path, there are a couple cards that I would run no matter what. One of them is Bojuka Bog. Bojuka Bog is a fantastic card, and having it in the mana base means that you can have one more access of interactive utility. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, gives us access to other players' cards, which we otherwise would not have. We are playing a very limited strategy with all creatures, so this is a wonderful card for us to use. Clone Shell should only be used if you are moving in the direction of sacrificing lots of cards, because this will give us access to cards from the top of our library as well as cards in the bottom of our library. Now, if you decide to go the burn route, then there are a couple of cards that I would seek out. Starting with Gary, the Gray Merchant of Asphodel. When he touches the board, every opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and then you gain life for every single burn damage they took. You can also have Witty Roastmaster to make everybody burn anytime a creature touches your battlefield, Flayer of the Hatebound to do the same thing, Molten Gatekeeper to do the same thing, Sir Conrad the Grim to burn people every single time a creature is put into a graveyard, which of course is all our deck is doing at all points in time. Then we have Perforos, God of the Forge, giving us a burn of 2 every time a creature touches our battlefield, and Terror of the Peaks, which will give anybody a burn of 3 or more. It just depends on which creature we drop on the board, really. Terror of the Peaks is burning anybody for the power of any creature we touch the board with, meaning that all of our cards that give 1/1 or 2/1 or 1/0 to all of our board are now doing double duty by powering up Terror of the Peaks. But that's not all. If you decide to go more of a stormy route, then you want to have ways of sacrificing your creatures so that you can push forward. Obviously, this would mean that cards like Sir Conrad the Grim will serve double duty here, but Sling Gang Commander and Siege Gang Commander will give you the tokens you need for this strategy to work. Any of these creatures that touch the board and give you tokens will work for our strategy. Then Viscera Seer gives you a sack outlet for this strategy, along with Woe Strider, and you can even add in Priest of Gix and Priest of Urabrask to give yourself a couple of rituals in the 99 to give you a little more gas. And then Pitiless Plunderer and Rose Rune Treasurer can make the incremental stuff you are doing throughout the game translate into burn damage, or in the case of Pitiless Plunderer and Rose Rune, both of them give us treasures as creatures enter the battlefield under our control or are sent to the graveyard. If we are constantly getting cards that do ritual effects, token summoning effects, and we have Pitiless Plunder on the board, we can basically keep on refueling our commander's ability until our deck is almost thinned out of cards, as long as we are lucky with the grabs, which we will be if we keep using Viscera Seer to scry things and make sure that we are manipulating the bottom and top of our deck appropriately. But that all said, those are some of the upgrade paths that I would go if I was upgrading this past the $15 list, but obviously you pick and choose what you want to do. That said, let's go ahead and see how we feel about the whole package. In conclusion, Grenzo seems like he's going to be a super fun commander to play, and with his bottom of the deck ability, there's a whole lot more angles to play with Scry than normal. Normally, Scry is wonderful for letting us manipulate the top of our deck, but being able to use it as an effective way to supercharge the bottom of our deck for Grenzo is fantastic. If I had to pick one weakness of Grenzo, though, it is how reliant this deck will be on the command zone. Obviously, when that happens, you need to have either a strong ramp package for resummoning the commander, or you need to have the willingness to put in a couple of non-creature cards like Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots to keep Grenzo on the board. Whichever direction you decide to go in, take your pick, though be warned, the more non-creatures you put into the deck, the more you dilute your potential gamblings with the deck. That all said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Please like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. Hey, if you can do me a huge favor, if you enjoyed this deck, go ahead and show this video to maybe 3 friends of yours. Just 3 at your local LGS or wherever you happen to go where people like budget decks. Maybe we can see if we can grow the channel just a little bit more. That way, every little bit helps. And obviously, my Patreon is still there for those who want to support me over there. That all said, thank you all for watching, and as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.